So as I mentioned, we're very honored to have three guests who will be presenting their poetry today and also presenting other interventions, including images. We have a series of quotes from a manifesto, and we'll also be discussing independent publishing and the politics of knowledge circulation. So I think we have a very exciting panel today. So we'll start by introducing our speakers, and then we will do 3 rounds of interventions where we will rotate among the 3 speakers 3 times. So you'll have a chance to hear from all of them. We hope to wrap up the presentation section about an hour from now, and then we'll still have 30 minutes for conversation following that. So our first guest is Azad Ashim Sharma. He is a poet and essayist living in South London. He is the director of the 87 Press. He is the author of Against the Frame, published by Bark Press in 2017, and Boiled Owls, published by Nightboat Books in 2022 or 2023, forthcoming. His poems have been published recently by Stand Magazine, the Asian American Writers Workshop, and Gutter Magazine. His prose has been published by Spam Zine, Mir Online, and is forthcoming in Magma Magazine. So let's welcome Azad. And next, I'll invite Silvia to introduce our second speaker, Juana.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. It's my honor to introduce Juana Iris Goergen from Puerto Rico. She is a poet and emerita professor at DePaul University, Chicago, and visiting professor at Inter-American University, Arecibo, Puerto Rico. She has published a lot. La Sal de las Brujas, a poetry collection, which is a finalist in the Letras de Oro Awards, 1997. La Piel a Medias, 2003. Las Ilusas, Dreamers, in Desarraigos, Contratiempo in 2008. And Mar en los Huesos, Pandora, Lobo Estepario, 2017. Her poetry has been published in numerous anthologies, most recently Latin USA, 2018 collection. She was initiator and co-organizer for 11 years of the Chicago International Poetry Festival, Poesía en Abril. She has edited 9 poetry anthologies, among them Susurros para disipar las sombras, Rapsodia de los sentidos, and Ciudad 100. She has been awarded Contratiempo Poesía Cultura Award in 2014 and the José Revueltas Poetry Award in 2018. At the moment, she is working on 2 poetry collections, La Celda del Iris, Iris Prison Cell, which is under review, and Requiem al Sueño Americano, Otro, Canto General. Requiem to the American Dream, another Canto General. In 2019, she was honored by the International Poetry Festival Poesía en Abril Committee and at DePaul University with a poetry award that bears her name, the Juana Iris Goergen Poetry Award. We are so honored to have you with us today, Juanita.
Thank you, Silvia. Silvia will be providing translation for Juana's readings, and so I'll introduce her as well. So Professor Silvia Tandeciarz holds a BA and MA in English from Stanford University and a PhD in literature from Duke University. She is Chancellor Professor of Modern Languages and Literatures at William & Mary, where she has worked since 1999. A translator, poet, and scholar in the field of Latin American cultural studies, she has published widely on the intersections between memorial and human rights initiatives in post-dictatorship Argentina. Her most recent book, Citizens of Memory, Affect, Representation, and Human Rights in Post-Dictatorship Argentina, published in 2017 by Bucknell University Press, is forthcoming in Spanish translation from Carta Propia Press. In addition to the poems of Puerto Rican poet Juana Goergen, her work in translation includes the book-length critical treatise, Masculine Feminine, published by Duke University Press in 2004, and the Insubordination of Signs, published by Duke University Press in 2004, both by the Chilean theorist Nelly Richard. She is the author of the poetry collection Exorcismos, published by Betania in 2000. So let's welcome Silvia. And last, certainly not least, Oscar Guardiola-Rivera is a writer, curator, newspaper columnist, and media commentator, professor of political philosophy and human rights at Birkbeck College in the University of London, and a fellow of the RSA. He is the award-winning author of What If Latin America Ruled the World, published by Bloomsbury in 2010, and Story of a Death Foretold, published by Bloomsbury in 2013, which was shortlisted for the 2014 Bread and Roses Award. Both were listed among the best nonfiction books of the year by literary critics in The Guardian, Observer, and the Financial Times. His recent publications include In Defense of Armed Art Struggle, published by London and Bogota in Utadio in 2019, and A Future for the Philosophy of Liberation in Decolonizing Ethics, edited by Amy Allen and Eduardo Mendieta of the University of Pennsylvania Press, forthcoming in 2020, as well as the poetic novella Night of the World, published by the 87 Press in 2020, from where he'll be reading for this event today. His docu-film titled Art and Fire, A Journey in 5 Films, in collaboration with Hay Literary Festivals, is also available at this link, and I will share the link in the chat. So we are experimenting with Zoom intertitles today, and hopefully it will help even make the poetic interventions even more provocative. So I'll go ahead and share screen and invite Azad to start us off.
Thanks very much, Emily, and thanks to Stephen for inviting me here. It's a real privilege, and thanks to all of you for attending. I'm going to read some poems that I've written recently under the title Gastelum, which is a way of conceiving of post-Brexit Britain for me. I've got a timer because I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to get into it. Reduction to loam we could be, proto-grammatologues I see you, deferring and differing the shake of the task in the trace of misery beams. Suddenly to be cockneyed, a chicken by bow type of situation eggs the question really on basic demands, four bare necessities, live, laugh, love, let go. Yeah, we all tried humor, doing the Einaudi on a makeshift ice shelf. Existence is paused, to be free in the ruin or hold the popol vuh, following the guidance to re-allegorize the allegory. I held you close to me in the water, saying flowed between the repulsions of skin, which we were feeling as a quantum moment of contact, just to be unthinkable and yet thinking. We addressed the constraints, trying to reckon with raquette and the waves of acid, an ocean of mitochondria or druids from our inner polis. We were trying to hold each other outside of time. Far off shall we go to decolonize normative life with antifreeze on my armpit hair and an oven glove on my left hand when it speaks in ink. It is never done but stays in the saying. To write poetry is to move into the air, resist nihilism's endgame of deracination, and to address you in poetry with and as endless spelling errors, abriactive code for dissent, melismatic ostinato of mantric wove. To syncopate together, or what subtends as the quotidian readerly poetics, we take notes when words make worlds for us and moved in concrescence. Somewhere over the hill, it was so easy. Then the red tape was placed over our thumbs. We acknowledged a mutual respect for books, the pages of which we were rendered unable to turn, our mouths taped over with red, as we tried to utter the unutterable saying, a protest against the anti-protest receipts. Of tongues, macaronic, before we sought flexion in, such ebullient fractal interiors, weren't ever fulliness. To remain curious is to be provoked in the best way. Through all this maelstrom or death of thought, is onto or ontic another ology, sah, the state of apology, and we were chained in and by it, a gastelum, to speak of and at the threshold of the haptic, Asiatic negritude to unmake thingifications, wilt to knowledge, deserts in the sky, breath weights, Yes, the impulse to meander or circumvent gangrenous landlords, demiurgic non-compliance, pessimism as epistemic decay. Houseplants wiggle in the draft to find critique of unreasonable reason in the face of supervenes the regulatory boards, defined as juridical flowers resting on the succulent globe. Détourne, the object from prefatory withdrawal, a teleological suspension of the poetic, to get back at the sutured essence, take the leap into the gray, growth felt as an implosion. It was not meant to be like this. We were made to be held together. Democratic obsessions of the spectacle. To be human is to be untimely. To be posthuman is to recover semblance. It may not always be the best thing going, but sometimes it is necessity that prompts us in movement. To be on the laterality, shifting the geography and its psyche of das Sein. It means to break through the sign continuum. Go to the future where exchange is oxygen.
Juana, I think that's your cue.
This presentation is part of a longer performance, so bear with me a little bit. Q, templo. Cuando de Minán, caracol, rompió la calabaza, de los huesos de Yayael el arquero, nacieron islas. Un collar de islas se derramó de las aguas. Del Caribe bullicioso nacieron. De los huesos de Yayael nacieron. Y el manatí, Estareitei, fue nombrado rey de aquellas aguas. Tiempo después, el ombligo de Yocajú pariría un toa. Pariría todo el toa de una vez. Mujeres, niños, hombres, árboles y animales naciendo juntos en el gran parto que estremeció los cielos y la tierra. Guariquen, Nabor y Guariquen, ven a ver, guerrero, ven a ver, cantaban los sinsontes en el primer areito que se oyó en las islas. Cocú, cocú, cocú. La luz, la luz, la luz, se oía el zumbador en la montaña. Más tarde, cuando los falsos dioses envenenaron a Yocajú y el Mucarú, que es también múcaro y lechuza, proclamó 3 veces su nombre. Yocajú, Yocajú, Yocajú. En la noche que desde entonces reina, se oyó a los taínos. Wa, Anaki, Mayani Macana, Bagua. No, enemigo, no matarás mi mar. Se alzaron los guerreros, caciques y cacicas que llegaron al mundo con un pedazo del ombligo divino entre los dientes. Anacaona, Guarico, Jibá. Guariquen, Areito, Yari. Guariquen, Taguagua. Guariquen, Caonabo. Anacaona, Guarico, Areito. Guarico, Anacaona. Guaraguamo. Guara, Mainacaona. Guara, Guanacaboa. Guarico, Sama. Anacaona, Osama Guajei, Osama Maraca, Osama Mayoyoacán, Osama Jabao, Guaitiao, Siucayeque, Boyoquisqueya, Tainoja, Macana Maboya, Macananaki, Macana, Tuira, Taira, Ja, Guaraguti. Guara, Gutiona, Wara, Guti Raim, Wara, Guti Roca, Arahuacareito.
Ku, temple, 1. When the Minyan Caracaracol shattered the calabash, from the bones of Yayael, the archer, islands were born, a necklace of islands spilled from the waters. From the teeming Caribbean, they were born. From the bones of Yayael, they were born, and the manatee, Estarete, shimmering and still, was named king of those waters. Sometime later, Yokau's navel would birth a toa, would birth all of the toa at once. Women, children, men, trees, and animals born together in the great birth that illuminated the skies and earth. Guariken, Nabori, Guariken. Come see, warrior, come see, sang the mockingbirds in the first areito heard on the islands. Goku, Goku, Goku. The light, the light, the light. The hummingbird was heard in the mountains. Later, when the false gods poisoned Yokahu and the Mukaru, which is both Mukaro and owl, thrice proclaimed his name. Yokahu, Yokahu, Yokahu. In the night that since then reigns, the Tainos were heard. Wa, Anaki, Mayani, Makana, Bagua. No, my enemy, you will not kill my sea. The warriors rose up, caciques and cacicas, who came into the world with a piece of the divine navel between their teeth. 9. Anacoana, come to the forest. Come see the lovely place for the areito. Come see the gold earrings. Come see Kaonabo. Anacaona, come to the areito. Come here, Anacaona. You seashell trumpet. You garden. You place of tall palms. Come, listen. Anacaona, listen to the huiro and the maracas. Listen to the wooden drums. Listen to the music. The friends of Boyo Quisqueya, the good in this way we will kill, the malignant spirit. We will kill the enemy. We will kill the evil Christian temper. Thus, in this way, with your foot, with the heel of your foot, with the toes of your foot, with the sole of your foot, dancing at the areito.
I guess that's my cue. Let me first acknowledge Stephen and Emily. Let me first acknowledge what an honor it is for me to share this platform with Juana, whose poetry I have read. In fact, I have committed to heart. I couldn't stop myself blurting a few lines in Taino as she was speaking and beginning to dance. And let me, of course, acknowledge the ancestors who are here with us. I am not going to read from The Night of the World, although I will refer to it. Rather than that, I have prepared some pieces in response to the dialogue with Azad and with Juana. This is the first one. This is a rhythmic overlay between Kibnaira Unyetasis Sarnakap Sanyani and the meticulous realization of our dream's desire, A bass-soaked overlay, reverse, saturates, puncturing the line of succession, opening up an interval, the lowest rhythmic time-space interval, la frontera, border, el fin, as vortex and open wound, heridas abiertas con venas abiertas, vortices, void, vorágine, whirlpools of water from where everything comes to which everything returns, as there's no loss, neither beginning nor end, but base, suspense, base-soaked relay, an arrested image. Cut up intervals between imaginals, as in the short film Now. Rhythmic sound overlays to see, hear, and sense, think, not contemplate. No wonder here, but word cinemas, dwelling and wandering, and so we move, looking backwards and thus walking straight forwards, searching in the past for the light of what is to come, but not yet. We walk rhythmically in bass-soaked intervals where the future begins. If we stop thinking metamerically, then we may distinguish the light of lighthouses from the lanterns of wreckers who lure us aground to loot us and slave us, our bodies. We must break free from such chains. It is not so much that the body is a kind of clothing, but rather the clothing is a kind of body. Let's go at sea to see, really see here, a rhythmic overlay, a bass-soaked relay that reverse saturates without delay, for we can no longer wait. Thesis 1. Where to begin? The readings gathered here provoke that question. They also provoke us to provoke the question. They are of time, appear in time, and as such shall disappear. But they're also against the times. This time, the fire this time, they evoke in times like this, Baldwin's 1963, The Fire Next Time. Notice the rhythmic, musical title. It contained 2 essays. One.
I'm so sorry, Oscar. Please continue.
No, thank you. That's exactly the kind of interruption one wants. Where to begin? To begin again, the readings gathered here provoke that question. They also provoke us to question the question. They are of time, appear in time, and as such shall disappear. But they're also against the times, this time, the fire this time. They evoke in times like these, Baldwin's 1963, The Fire Next Time. Notice the rhythmic musical title. It contained 2 essays. One, a letter to a child on the subject of liberation, its anniversary. The other, down at the cross, on crossroads and crossing, among other things, of rhythms of belief and non-belief, a journeying musical figure, once again a counterpoint, as a region of the spiritual mind. Thus, time and geography, transformation and motion, the time-space that matters, transmotion. We acknowledge this chronology, but also attempt to puncture it. The very title, Moving Arts Decolonize Humanities and Arts, should be considered as a deictic gesture of radical dualism. It indicates itself as part of a trajectory which it recovers as its successor, but also as brothers Azad and Kashif and Juana clearly teach us, this line of succession is punctured by a set of vanguard and rearguard moves and practices which amount to a new choreography, or tactical moves in protest against and in combat with the tendency towards the commodification of poetry and art that is the present currency in that trajectory. Of currency they speak, and of bodies as living currency. Would you like to hear the truth? Look at the math. Look for the math. If a book is £10 and you give 75% to a retailer or distributor, that leaves you £2.50. £1 goes to the writer, if and when she sells 1,000 copies. Do you still think you're free to read whatever the fuck you want and express whatever the fuck you want? Your capitalist bullshit is history. Like the lady said, there is no such a thing. History is his story, he said, and you haven't so heard the whole of it, not yet.
Every exhale we pushed onto the novel were takhaluses. By the time we reached the point of recognition, it was late. Lazy modernists, we turned into by the back road keys. On the page, we made good first-hand impressions. We bobbed our heads like serpents out a wicker chamber, tennised our elbows under the blaring square waves, voices gruff from wheeling up the interior modulation, did close reading in the pause before we fell into it. We woke up to the vibes and let them work through us. Our teeth were licked by the acid talk of what we spat. In the open air, we broke the tick of the second hand. Pheromones circulate the sonoluminescing dum-da. Feral moans unreticulate the phonotactic tirekiteta, and beats indexed by our flesh silvered in sun conscience. Erring on the side of upcoming brilliance to only have been consumed by panic. It was a trance-like state of overcoming. What went into us to write is to existence as of and in at the otherwise. Quantum similitude of the long axes. To say is to subsist, being part of our anguished ink wishes as it was always. Yo, bear with me, Lucretius. We come in at the afterwards, singing our chorale in cantos of guided vantage points at the demi-verge of requisite remonstrata we desired. Out of, remained in the foregoing of a conclusion for, faculties of deep dirt to find odd futures with fishy tones. How grey could the sky actually get? Maybe more so. From down, we made it through, a break with love, where care becomes enmeshed with the politic of it all, not to be able to integrate with notations with the draft. There, with each other, it came to be that the chains didn't hold much but a space we could exit into or from, for they aren't always already the same in the first place. No Python will build a Parthenon, no country for tuna. Finding ourselves toiled by the land, we longed for oceans, were made of astrologers who lived airless on comets. In a tower block, semi-detached from rurality, we met each other, sang together. Our eyes wearied into the screen, writing into the screen, thirsty for poems. Some combination of liquidity is sound systemic. We made sunset musicals, a combination of mad, sad proto-orgasms, turned Freytag pages with heron-like raspiness, original piracy, love embraced, material jouissance, and whence guided by Coal Conti, we desired each other and were desired by each other from a vantage where the city looked small, spiky. We were our love children, never returning to the same. What we needed was not the same as wanting, but it made for better refusal of unpayable debt, to be forgiven or having received forgivingness, much ado in the late spring to mislay a claiming, not to be emptied or excavated by remonstration, had forced the defense of poetry out of the songs. Popular calls taught restitution, flabbergasted aroma, or it was an arrhythmia opposite to the disclaimer. Broader feeling over the sink of realism rose up, alabaster overtures in Euro-modern surplus good. Disgust abound won't suffice for purpose things. We felt the urge to put our heads through the walls. May have awoken to claret blue dusk in the suburbs. Sat on the edge, we realized it was not so optimistic to live in paper and its texture in flight from logic. We became universal individuals by not partaking in their measure. We weren't commiserated or raised, and we heard each other kicking through the earth.
Se vende pieza de indias, se venden piezas de ébano, Se vende negra conga y negro carabalí. Se venden casi de regalo al final del espectáculo. Una alabate, su canción lejana de flores amarillas, por la marca del carimbo y por el pie quebrado. Negra conga, negro carabalí, la brecha de una herida dejó palomas muertas en sus ojos, nueva fronda en su pecho y caminar de angustia en sus rodillas, sin poder detenerse, golpeados. Las horas desgarran la amapola de sus venas, por el fuego del látigo en la espalda, por la nariz torcida y el veneno del amo en las entrañas. Aún no salen del espanto. En las islas aún buscan su grigrí entre las aguas. Aún tiemblan sus manos asombradas. Aguanile, 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 aguanile. Así nació el tambor, como delirio de pura lejanía, y retumbaron la bomba y el bongo, y llegaron los ñáñigo carabalí, y los mandinga llegaron, y los daomey, y los ashanti, y los yoruba, y los congo llegaron, su oído de tambor multiplicado en canto. Hace un tiempo infinito dejaron caer lágrimas, como dejaron caer al mar sus huesos para encontrar la orilla. Muntu, muntu, muntu. Hombres, personas, pueblos que el mar trajo a estas islas, senderos de sus manos en cadenas. En sus orillas se alza Ollá, reina del cementerio. En sus orillas, agua, el alma ha aprendido a vivir a sobresaltos. ¿A dónde? ¿A dónde se han escondido sus orillas? Orí, que es también Olorum y Oludú Mare, previo conocedor de su destino, eligió para ellos la isla de los palmares en flor. Mañana madrugarán de nuevo. La rigidez de las piernas, los ásperos sonidos del látigo, los barcos saturados como un ahogo, no importan. Ha nacido el tambor, han vuelto los orillas, el eguá ha abierto los caminos. Muntu, 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 se oye el canto. Ya no duele delirar una flor a solas. Sus manos son agua, son tambor, son todo un mar de huesos renaciendo. Gracias.
2. Pieza de indias for sale. Piezas de ébano for sale. Negro conga, negro carabalí for sale. For sale, almost for free at spectacle's end. A sail flaps its distant song of yellow flowers for the branding of the carimbo and the fractured foot. Negro conga, negro carabalí, the gaping wound left dead doves in their eyes, new foliage on their chest, and a walk of anguish in their knees, unable to stop, beaten. The hours tear the poppy from their veins, for the fire of the whip on their backs, for the crooked nose and the master's poison in their loins. Still, they cannot escape the horror. On the islands, still they search for their grigri in the waters. Still, Their stunned hands shake. 3. Thus, the drum was born as delirium of pure distance, and the bomba and bongo rumbled, and the ñánigo Carabalí arrived, and the mandinga arrived, and the Dahomey and the Ashanti and the Yoruba and the Congo arrived. Their drummer's ear multiplied in song. An infinite time ago, they let tears fall. As to the sea, they let their bones fall to find the shore. Muntu, muntu, muntu. Men, persons, peoples, that the sea brought to the islands, trails of their hands in chains. On the shoreline, Oya arises, queen of the cemetery. On the shoreline, Awa, the soul, has learned to live in fits and starts. Where have their orishas hidden? Ori, who is also Olorun and Oludumare, prior diviner of their destiny, chose for them the island of the palm groves in bloom. Tomorrow, again, they will awaken at dawn. The stiffness in their legs, the harsh sounds of the whip, the ships saturated like a drowning, they do not matter. The drum has been born. The orishas have returned. Elegua has opened the paths. Muntu, muntu, muntu. The chant is heard. It no longer hurts alone to hallucinate a flower. Their hands are awa, are drums, a whole sea of bones being reborn.
Thesis 2. Within sociopoetic form lies the seeds of non-normative world building. Talk of breaking the rules, fire this time to set the powder keg of history on fire, pow wow. Recall though that only when the non-normative content exceeds the form, then and only then we see, hear and speak of building a revolutionary moment. The recent protests give us best proofs, lyrical, mathematical, and rhythmical, not metamerical, proof and examples of this. They can be defined as a small publisher and gallery spaces bleeding into street spaces, setting them on fire or pow wow. In all these cases, there is a shift from the decolonization of normative living in the utopian sense of that term to producing practices, writing, painting, singing, dancing, locking up arms or taking up arms, as opposed to merely productive practices, publishing industry or art world practices, thereby emphasizing the expository character of value under the current conditions, currency, settled opinion and opinion in the making. From here onwards, we seek not only redistributive, but also historical justice. The latter is a contingent claim, the value of which becomes explosive in time. In parallel with the conditions of expository value in digital and image mass consumption racial capitalism, this volatility becomes apparent only when protests and riots in the streets put pressure on current rentiers, financiers to pay increasingly higher sums of money here now with which to fund different institutions better capable of improving basic conditions of life, buen vivir, in exchange for protesters, rioters to postpone the day of the revolution, a base so delay interval relay. Ultimately, this practice orients us tendentially towards luxury communism, intersecting designs for the pluriverse and post-developmental practices. There is no guarantee at present that such an intersection will be possible, but we know this is why we protest. Not in the name of some image of the hereafter always already deferred into the future, but to avoid being reduced to zero and silence here now. We do not escape into the imagination, but make the journey back to the common here now. Call that the upright walk, the not yet revolution. The not yet revolution emphasizes the shortcomings of what some call race, liberal orders, and others term racial capitalism. Thesis 3. On the one hand, race liberal orders limit anti-racism's width and to the mechanisms of US-led global capitalism, whilst enabling new kinds of normalizing and rationalizing violences, mainly the exclusive, tokenistic, and avowedly counter-revolutionary diversity mechanisms. This is what Baldwin and Tandeciarz had said about the recovery and domestication of abolitionist poetry and songs of independence from the late 1940s onwards. Not only they function as a slight displacement of white supremacist religiosity, but also move tendentially towards fascism when they come back home to the former metropolitan countries like a boomerang, fomenting a misery of desire among the white and other settled middle classes that is related to but different from economic misery. On the other hand, racial capitalism means the simple truth that global capitalism is structured through differential lines of demarcation. Property may be capital, but property values are dependent on seemingly immaterial things like gender or race. This doesn't mean that white men are the enemy, that black, brown, and beige peoples are all poor victims or virtuous because of their authenticity or poverty. And it doesn't mean all white people benefit. It doesn't mean white literature, if there is such a thing, must be cancelled. It means instead that the class reductionism versus race reductionism debate doesn't really advance us. It means simply that decolonization isn't a model of allegiance, but that it is realized in the mode of alliance. The point is naturally not to founder in the poetry of the law of the jungle so dear to novelists, or to play allegiance to this or that kingdom. Rather, that we forget, that we forge alliances with familiar strangers, their imaginings and literatures, to fight against all kingdoms and empires. It means fuck the king, for he's only a king who believes he's the king. In that he's madder than the madman who only believes he's the king. Fuck the king, make kin.
I'm going to do something that I didn't say I was going to do. I finished a manuscript under a pseudonym, which Oscar turned the pseudonym into a character in his book from the 87 press. So this is from the Rubaiyat of Zidi ibn Sharm. It begins with an epigraph that I translated today. It's not my words. This is the words of Fez Ahmed Fez from a poem called With the East Wind. Why grieve if they deny me pen and ink? I have dipped my fingers in my heart's blood. What matter if my lips have been sealed? To every link of my chains, I have given a tongue. That was Fez. This is Zidi ibn Sharm. I didn't fancy being reasonable, so I took my copy of Enrique Dussell's Ethics of Liberation out of my backpack and swang liberally. Having discovered that lysis might mean chemistry, we wondered why the bleach was on sale and how we might better kick off against all the frames of necrotic whiteness. I lay down in the soft grass and the canine unit lay a turd on my chest. I want to become a map like John Donne, but ended up bagged up in polythene. I met some vulgar people at the university, just as it was becoming a corporation. People who wanted to do a Marxist reading group with no Das Kapital on the syllabus. It turned out that post means everything's as it was, and that late implies a conservative problem. In the art gallery, everyone was ballroom dancing to Beethoven's Fifth, looking at their phones behind each other's backs. We passed the duchy to the left hands of friends and came to a collective realization that Britishness is a sexually transmitted infection. We didn't have a choice about catching it. In the University Incorporated, the suits told us to pronounce genre like Marlon Brando, but we couldn't hear their repression of a glottal and guttural, "Save me, please." Gathering other excluded persons and victims, we found some solace in rental accommodation, mysterious powders, funny tinged liquid aromas, all of which built an architecture of liberation between us. Car horns and fire engines are not the same as an urban free jazz quintet. The rhythm of the city is the feet of the people, stammering over notes and movements. Formed by the colonial situation, our bodies enter the fray as negated material, but we found mattering to be syncretic, subcontinental mass-primed globality. When we spoke of the majority, it did not take isolated instances of the electoral as a starting point or springboard. Rather, we were interested in the multitude of the damned. We began to write and share poems that were sub-songs from the same sheet: liberation, revelation, decolonization, and critiqued, flagged at the mast on the sail pointed tomorrow. We took the horse to water and brought the water to the mill, but we couldn't say these were hills we'd die on because they'd all been mined for minerals. Consumption does not require death. That does not require death. To produce that which is being consumed is probably the only situation we should be entertaining at this current juncture in the history of the climate. All of us emerged from the seminar to the roads. Hardcore païens, the lot of us, Vande Mataram or such like adab. We are the people and the people are not happy. I got friends in bands, friends in bandos. I don't really care about being polite anymore. You want to talk about ghazals in English, but don't they all sound really terrible? Rolled up and filterless, it was a strong smoke which we exuded from our nostrils. It symbolized our escape from conservative traditions. To be diasporic is to just be curious about it all. Right, I'm going to do one last lot and then that's good. Okay. More time, we just mimicking consumption as a kind of unfinished process. Then we do what Marx did with Hegel, turn it upside down and voila, it's different. It's funny watching these young London creatives who basically want to do Instagram pornos, claiming to be writers or aesthetes or DJs. Basically, they were the popular kids at school. What is passing for poetry is the quotation, and we know they're all out of context. Mollycoddling readers with their long talk. Just staple the thing together and post me it. Khalas. When I was a little boy, I used to think the South Bank was the hub of culture. And now it just looks like a solidified open sewer, like the Thames just breached its banks and froze. I was with you in the park and we spoke in hushed tones about Penguin Random House, keeping the furlough money despite big sales. And everyone really hyped murky books that day. What's that about? Corporate social funds or the business of humanitarianism. It's like those dolphin free tuna cans or the idea that plastic is worse than commercial fishing. We can do much better, for fuck's sake. I love it when they call people of color racist for calling out BAME Tories. Well, yeah, they probably are a total disgrace to us. And I value my freedom to offend just like their lackeys. Voting for a BAME Tory must be the weirdest thing ever. I mean, imagine if they actually ran London again. We would be so fucked. And I think we'd have no choice but to burn the city down and start over.
Ay, 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 los pecados del rey blanco, lávelos en perdón la reina negra. Yetún de Marta llora, llora Yetún de Marta, y los barcos repletos de congos y yorubas fluyen de sus ojos negros. Llora barcos, llora contemplando el azul mar en los ojos de su nieta cuarterona, azul, gélido y detenido como los temidos, amados ojos del amo blanco. Yetún de Marta llora, llora barcos para lavar los pecados del mar y navegar una vez más con sus hermanas negras en el mar que redimen sus lágrimas por los ojos azules de su nieta casi blanca. Viento que nos empuja a amar, a amar, a martirios de mar, de amar, donde todo renace y se desploma en el grito repetido en todos los gritos y en los cuerpos de islas náufragas que se hunden. Para eso fueron hechas, para habitar el centro de todos los vacíos. A esta hora la luna duerme en los arrecifes. Todavía hay barcos o hay yolas, da lo mismo. Hay peces y puertos calcinados, hay mar y sal y olas en constante movimiento. Falta la corriente de orillas y semíes, lamiendo las riberas para augurar el retorno de Taino Muntu triunfante. I have to say that in 2011, a DNA test revealed a significant percentage of genetic material of Taino Arawak in me and of African Karavali in me. And with the authority that blood gives me, I wanted to give voice in my voice to the voice of my ancestors. And I dedicate this manuscript, this book, to Lucas and Carlos and Adelina, so they can find roots. Thank you.
The sixth poem in part 3 begins with an epigraph by Julia de Burgos. I wash the sins of the white king in forgiveness, Black Queen. Yetunde Marta weeps, she weeps, Yetunde Marta, and the ships flush with Yoruba and Congolese flow from her black eyes. She weeps ships. She weeps beholding the blue sea in the eyes of her Cuarterona granddaughter, blue, icy and still, like the feared, loved eyes of the white master. Yetunde Marta weeps, weeps ships to wash away the sins of the sea and to sail once again with her black sisters on the sea that her tears redeem for the blue eyes of her granddaughter, almost white. Two. Wind that pushes us to see, to love, to martyrdoms of sea, of love, where all is reborn and shatters in the cry repeated in all the cries and in the bodies of the shipwrecked islands that sink. That is why they were made, to inhabit the center of all voids. At this hour, the moon dreams among the reefs. Still, there are boats or yolas. It makes no difference. There are fish and burnt ports. There are seas and salt and waves in constant motion. What is missing is the current of orishas and semillas lapping the shores to presage the return of Taino, Muntu, triumphant.
Thesis 5. Men desire to see the idea of man with their own eyes and therefore created natural man, the Indian, Papagenos. In the wake of their confrontations with the peoples they saw but failed to recognize as such, having left the presumed safety of the land and ventured all the way to the other side of the ocean to settle there. As it happened during the 16th century and then again in the last decades of the 18th, during the first decades of the 21st century, the years of endless war and plague, the era of poets was said to have ended, replaced by a new visuality. And Indians and poets declared unfit for philosophy, testimony, and consent in any manner acceptable to law, reason, or letters. The Indian is thereby seen as both wise in the hidden measurements that would make up the regular harmony of Mother Nature, as natural ecologists, or contradictorily as having to pay the price for their reintegration into the one same group by confessing the error of their untimely ways. Thus, either out of time, lacking history and before time, or in a kind of always already deferred futurity. They are spoken for in a sort of preservationist tense. The study and practice of literature in the West largely stands on the premise that laws and literature begin with letters. Anything otherwise, texts of image, object, and sound amalgamated in Mesoamerican hieroglyphs, the weaving stories of Andean Quipu, the pictoglyphs of the Mavecure Hills, the complementary visual mnemonic cues of pictographic inscription found throughout the Native Americas is treated as a relic of a pre-literate and pre-literary and civic past. The ongoing poetics of these signs are obscured by a cultural logic of the archive, the museum, the university, the biennale, and the exhibition as a final resting place ought to be protected or bet for and against. Protected from present perils, they're also prevented from disclosing dangerous visions of the future and futures past. In those regimes of visuality, bird catchers, coca munchers, and lotus eaters could be overheard everywhere, but singularly nowhere, imitating the song of the Iroquois or the dance of the Yanomamo, in the belief that through such means the birds themselves or maestra peas could be captured. All such eccentricities are simulations, painted in the manner of the old masters Dutch. As such, their relation to truth and beauty remains chiaroscuro. A loving image must be produced that does justice to such a secret, the secret of history, and moreover one that lets go of it. Call this the idea of relations, with relations come temporality and history, the fool, the world full of others, also the equation of truth with secrecy and the secret of the gift. Thesis 6. Justice demands that beauty has its splendid funeral pyre, to do justice to what lies within, both acceleration and the handbrake as the tropes, the poetics of history and the future. Decolonization and overcoming require a subjective attitude contrary to reality, at least the reality of monstrosity prohibited by laws and letters, contrary to the ban on liminality declared by the tribunals of public opinion, which the publishing industry in its corporate form exists for. Through such producing activities against settled opinion contrary to the times, the oppressed become conscious, conscientious of their role, thereby transforming their seemingly faithful circumstances, their environs, and themselves. Call this the poetry of the future. We write for memory so as to produce the future, a memory coming from the future. Thesis 7. In the concluding chapter of Black Skins, White Masks, Fanon quotes some lines taken from the 18th Brumaire about revolution and the poetry of the future. Entire libraries could be written about this lost aesthetics of production, the artist as producer, trickster, shaman, vanguard, rearguard, reader, and writer, sculptor of time in time. But to speak of a sculpting time immediately brings to mind poetic cinema and cinematic poetry. Also the poetry of the future and, crucially, what all of them have in common with humble things like trees, water, or stones. Often thought of as inert, lifeless, and non-human, stones actually invite us to see, hear, think, and act in other ways. To stop thinking metamerically and instead move rhythmically. Stones propose another sense of time whereby the deep past of the planet proffers a meager yet massive support to human acts and pockets of resistance, as if the veins of metal in rock led to our veins of blood. It has been observed that to place a stone upright so that it stands vertical is an act of symbolic form exceeded by content. The stone becomes a presence, a dialogue begins. The sense of this technology, this artifact, this poetry of the future, a sort of diplomacy for human, non-human relations, comes to us in the shape of a story. It can be found in a letter to children written from a prison in 1931. It strikes like lightning once more in the course of a dialogue about how to live with stones between a correspondent in London and his addressee in the Lacandona jungle of southern Mexico, one of the first liberated time spaces of our world, a base-soaked delay-relay interval, a handbrake. Revolution and resistance in the shape of a pocket, a truthful one, here and now, when nothing remains but green twilight and green lightning. The figure in this story, my last dramatis personae, the one missing from Azad's manifesto, is the child. Through her, she is the protagonist of The Night of the World. Truth as a relational revelational finds a new formulation. The poetry of the future, the stateless state. But this reading comes here to an end. And so I will tell you that story in another time.
There we go. Many of the quotes that we shared today came from notes on aesthetic production, the commodification of poetry, and vanguard publishing practices by Azad Ashim Sharma and Kashif Sharma Patel. Some of the images were provided by Juana, some of the images were provided by Oscar, and some of the quotes were also provided by Oscar. So now we have time and we can share our responses or questions for the speakers. So please feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and share.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Stephen.
Jump in front of everybody here. Thank you first, all of you, This is more than I could ever have imagined. So it's really quite brilliant, and I thank all of you. And I have so much to say, but I won't. I'm going to cheat and not talk about all the things I actually want to ask about from the actual production, but maybe also think about some of the conversations that we've had building up to this event, in particular about publishing. I saw it emerges in Oscar's work and Azad's work, and I think even in Juana's work about the production, but also then the dissemination and distribution, the translation of poetry, the politics of poetry, the political economy of poetry, and the way in which that is, let's say, hijacked and commodified, but also how there is always an element of productive destruction within poetry. So perhaps you could, each of you could tell us about your relationship to poetry and its production, and obviously then actually literally its production and getting it out into book or any other form. Thanks.
Azad, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can start off. Thanks for that really considered question. And I'm really glad to hear that there have been more conversations as part of this series about the role of publishing in the kind of like dissemination of knowledge and cultural production. I think it's it's a weird topic, but something that's kind of got like its fishhook in me and the better half of the 87 Kashif. We've become quite obsessed with this. And I think the obsession comes from the fact that well, we were poets before we became publishers, and a lot of the time in the UK, I think that well, I mean, the kind of narrative in the UK about the States is also like a weird kind of like dreamy Americana type situation where like, oh, the States is so great, you guys do diversity so much better than we ever could, rah, rah, rah. And I'm kind of like, I mean, okay, great, but then like we also have diversity initiatives here that are like real big failures. And we should address those, right? Because they're our problem here. And one of the things that frustrated me a lot was that we seem to have forgotten that a human being is not like a single kind of a singular entity. Like it doesn't have like a single facet to them. We have multiplicities between us, and we're complex as individuals, right? So when you bring identity politics into poetry and you start commodifying the work of literature or art on the basis of the identity of the author, I get frustrated with that, because then it becomes a tick box exercise to get your funding, or a tick box exercise to become on a press. And really what I was inspired with was a lot of people who were quite literally just using university print credit accounts, which I think the neoliberals have now taken away. But it used to be the case that professors got like an infinite amount of like printer credit. So like PhD students would like capitalize on this, or like take it, and we just staple together stuff at the institution and we'd circulate it, and it would be like in response to really in the moment of current events. And there was a certain rawness and a certain ruggedness to that kind of poetry, which I was really inspired by during my time at the University of Sussex, and continue to be inspired by on a national level here, because there is plenty of examples, and that's my piece on that.
So there was a question in the chat, Azad, for the manifesto. I put the title, but if you wouldn't mind putting I know there's a link where you can download it. I just couldn't find it at the moment. If you could,
I just did that.
Chat. Oh, thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, sure.
Juana, Oscar, Silvia, do you want to respond?
I have to say something, because in Azad's poem, in one of his poems, there's this moment in the park when they are discussing presses, and they talk about one press and the other. And I was thinking while he was reading his poem, how true, how accurate that is, from the side of the poet who might be writing against the current of writing for these established presses, or when you write in another language, in something that is counter culture, basically. And thanks God for small presses. Teresa Longo wrote a book about the role of the small press in the US. And I think that the way she traces the history is sort of what Azad was saying that is happening now in the UK. There was a moment in the US when these small presses gave voice to the countercultural movements. And in this book, for example, I just wrote. I was not expecting that book to be published. I wrote because I needed to write. And I thought, the hell with the presses. I'm going to write, and if it goes, it goes. And if it doesn't go, it doesn't go. It doesn't matter. And this is why this particular book, and I think that's the reason for many hip hop artists doing poetry out loud, because you go back to the roots of poetry as an oral art rather than as this writing manuscript that somebody's going to publish. You just want people to listen to it and to relate to it. And what I did, and I think what many young poets and poets nowadays are doing, if they go counterculture, they do something that relies in the oral, in the letters, like Oscar was saying. It was the word before there was anything else, and the pictographs and so on. So you paint yourself, you do the words. Yeah, my 2 cents, but thank you.
And I just love to say really briefly from the perspective of translation. I met Juana more than 2 decades ago, let's say, at the beginning of my academic career. And I remember feeling when I heard her first recite her poetry that here was a really strong American voice. And yet she was writing in Spanish. So the audience was limited. And it took me back to a memory as an undergraduate at Stanford that I wrote about somewhere, where I had a professor, a revered professor of poetry, Al Jelpy, who has passed away since. And he said offhandedly in a class, you know, that he was really sad that there hadn't been a great American poet really since Walt Whitman, and that there'd really never been a great female American poet. That Emily Dickinson came close, and I, you know, was horrified by this, and the remark stayed with me, and it stayed with me. It stayed with me my entire career. And so one of the reasons that I do what I do as a translator is to, you know, in a way is to respond to Professor Jelpy and to say, you know, there are such amazing voices if we could only learn to listen, if we could only open up, all right, those spaces for them. So I think that that work is super important.
It's funny to hear Silvia. She reminds me of the fact that when I grow up, I want to be Joan Cortez and just perform with a jazz band behind. When I grow up, I want to be Azad. When I grow up, I want to be Juana. I might never grow up, but I can be hopeful. And so I just want to thank you for letting this child share a platform with you. Yes, what has been happening with writing and ideas is, as Azad pointed out, bona fide commodification and fetishization. The very notion of the decolonial turn, which I'm afraid I have to take responsibility for. You don't know the story of that notion, but it was born in some godforsaken back alley of a university south of the Rio Bravo, not in the United States. And yet it is there where it has fueled the academic career of some very well revered professors. Some of them used to be my friend, no longer. There is a funny contrast with what happens in the UK. I mean, here I am, a Latin Americano, a Colombian who ended up in London, not because I wanted to, not because I thought it was great, not because I was offered a better job, but rather because I once received a very nice invitation by the far-right paramilitary in my country to get the fuck out or else. So I ended up in London. It was the only place I could go. And but funnily enough, the very idea of decoloniality there has arrived into the universities because of the students and because of the student movement, which took to the streets of London in 2009, burned London in 2011. Remember? Kept charging against the police, who would charge back with their horrible horses every 6 months, and keeps doing so to this day, in spite of the clown king in power here and his horses. He loves horses, of course. And so it is in admiration and because of that movement and other movements you have seen in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, the news is not the pandemic. The news is the fact that protest has kept happening in spite of the pandemic and in spite of the fact that the clown kings who rule us have used the pandemic in order to make sure we do not protest, but gleefully thank them for our survival. Let me finish with this. I hate the fucking word survival. There is one much better word, and it was invented by Gerald Weissener, lovely poet. Survivance. It's a beautiful mashup of resistance and beyond survival. And that's what I want to dedicate my years when I finally grow up.
I wanted to say one other thing to kind of riff off all of that too. So Silvia mentioned this guy going on about Walt Whitman. I hear that a lot here too, right? Like that, oh, we haven't had this great like British poet. I mean, there are still people who talk about Shakespeare, like Shakespeare's alive and is the greatest living poet in the UK, right? And the thing is that Walt Whitman self-published and had to review all of his own books because no one was interested in his lifetime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So where the hell would Walt Whitman, this so-called great white American poet, be without self-publishing and without kind of the narcissism that comes with reviewing your own writing? Like, if I'm going to be really brutally honest about it, I like Walt Whitman's work. I found it actually quite refreshing, having read mostly early modern English verse at school. So Walt Whitman came along and actually sounded quite contemporary for me as an undergrad. I now know otherwise because of, I've had time to read, right? But the thing is that we should celebrate self-publishing. We should celebrate all these like artisanal forms of putting together zines where people are writing these beautiful manuscripts to each other and they're not produced in the same kind of mechanized way. And what we do with the 87 is we're trying to bridge a gap between these kind of underground zine publications or pamphleteers, I prefer, and what larger corporate presses are able to do with a kind of, industrial focus. The other thing to say about all this is that we are living in one of the most diverse times, and that we need to understand that we, like Silvia says, we do need to listen. And part of that is is why translation is so important in all of this. The UK has recently done this hot, stupid thing called Brexit. We've also got a government that's been imposing rules upon their education where we're not allowed to teach certain political theories. We're now not allowed to teach American literature is too lethal for British children, people. We are not allowed to teach that. So the whole point is that when we think about counterculture or kind of transcultural communication, we're being reduced back to like a very regressive baseline here, like an almost Victorian baseline in the UK. And so now, from that baseline, these protests that we've been seeing in the name of either Black Lives Matter or Sisters Uncut, Kill the Bill, my solidarity to all to the people who've been out on the streets doing this. But it's to show that firstly, we assert our right to life, but also if you look at the protests, the activists have been using them for sound systems because our rave culture has been denigrated, which is so integral to what the Caribbean community brought here from the 50s with sound systems, dubs and reggae. This is all part of the sound of what Britain is now trying to turn into a pamphlet and circulate. And, you know, we're with international movements within that too. But in order for that to happen, we have to resist this corporate model of publishing. And I can only appeal to readers here to please stop using Amazon and to boycott it indefinitely, because, you know, that's where Jeff Bezos got his money.
Do you have an alternative that you can recommend?
Yeah, buy direct from small presses and small bookstores if possible.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left. I was really struck by how today's event differed aesthetically from the other events we had, which were, you know, talking in an academic way about ideas. And so I would just love if we could reflect a little bit on the power of this poetic way of reflecting and how that felt for people, or if you have thoughts about this. This is something I always try to get my students to talk about. I teach Chinese studies and I'm teaching a class on revolutionary culture in China. And just today we're talking about the importance of the form for conveying ideas. And so I would love if anyone has thoughts about that.
I just want to say that hi, I'm Leah. I'm actually a student at CY in New York, working for my MFA, and it's very encouraging and really amazing and inspiring to hear the conversation even that's being discussed here, and the idea of small presses, and also just like hearing the voices that are not, you know, out there kind of being advertised for, you know, that are popular, which gives a lot of hope to the incoming or writers who are just, you know, are really afraid to voice themselves because they feel that there is no platform for them. And it's really disappointing for me, because I'm kind of an older student where I don't really have time for bullshit. So this is something that I've been waiting to do, and now I'm doing it, and I'm kind of like just gonna go with it. And I think that it's really great, and I wish that you guys could be more, you know, I just randomly found this event, and I'm so glad, because I was like, you know what, fuck work, I'm gonna attend this in the middle of the day. And I wish that I wish so many more people that I know that are in my program. I also organize readings myself, because the people that I'm in class with are literally afraid to speak, and their voices are so beautiful, and so many people are in this position. And I just want to say thank you, and I'm really happy that I came, and I'm going to check all of you out now. I won't stalk you.
Leah, I wish you the best of luck, and I want to just acknowledge and affirm and really relate to that fear. I also just want to say that the corporate publishing establishment want new writers to be scared. That's what they want. They want you to be scared and on the back foot, because they don't really want to publish you unless you're going to commodify yourself. So stay true to that, and your fear will guide you.
And change. And what I've been hearing is they want to change your work, and fuck that. So thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
It is true. The teachers and the professors are scared. I don't know how it is in the U.S., but I hear that most people are just associates and adjuncts and so on and so forth in very precarious contracts.
What?
The same is happening here in the UK.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
And on top of that, we are seeing ministers and top politicians saying in Parliament that we break the law if we teach such things as critical race theory. What the fuck? Something as niche as that is seen as terribly dangerous. Of course, I love it when they say that. Another minister said that Foucault was dangerous. I mean, really? I think Azad is dangerous, but that's what is really cool. We're totally under attack. Of course, the university is one of the last spaces for real free thinking and criticism that more or less remain in our society, and so the attack is total. So this is to acknowledge you, Leah, to encourage you and your friends, and do stalk us. Please go ahead. The best things happen by chance, at random, but that is a sort of determining chance. Things gravitate towards your hands, and I don't call that fate. I call that your hard work, Leah, and that's what will get you through to the other side. There is another side.
Thank you so much.
I think that's a perfect way to close today. It's 5. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us, everyone. And Stephen, it looked like you recorded, so I don't know what you're planning to do with that, but do you want to say anything about that?
I did record. I don't know what to do with it. I mean, I suspect I could try to experiment with that other monster called YouTube and post it online, and maybe post it on the Decolonizing Humanities website, as well as the Modern Languages and Literature website. So I could try to do as much promo as possible, but it's stumbling into new territory.
I think at the very least, Stephen, maybe if we could link it to the Decolonizing Humanities website, then people here could find it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And please, for anyone who's here, you're welcome to write me at the College of William and Mary, and I can I can connect you all. I'm sure you don't mind if I sacrifice all of your generosities, Azad and Oscar and Juan and Silvia. If you want to connect, and of course also Emily, if you are inspired by her work, as I have been. So you can write me, and please stay in touch. And thank all of you for everything you've done, and Emily for masterfully ushering us through.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's give one final thank you to our... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Oscar.
Just thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Emily, for putting this together. Thank to all of you who joined us tonight, and please do check the next events by the 87 Press, and we'll see each other very soon, I'm sure.
Same here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Keep your eyes peeled for a manuscript from Juana and Silvia on the 87.